Hello, I'm Paul McBride. I'm going to be reading a selection from Maxine Hong Kingston's memoir, published first back in the 1970s, entitled The Woman Warrior. And for many years, I taught American ethnic history, and that evolved into another course, a seminar on immigrant and ethnic literature. One of the things that surprised me as I chose various novels for my students to read is that with the women writers, there was almost always a Declaration of Independence scene where the woman character in the novel would declare her independence from the constraints that surrounded her. And with Maxine Hong Kingston being reared in a Chinese-American family, a culture, by the way, that is very patriarchal, her Declaration of Independence scene is especially interesting. So, Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior. My American life has been such a disappointment. I got straight A's, Mama. And Mama said, "Let me tell you a true story about a girl who saved her village." I could not figure out what was my village. And it was important that I do something big and fine, or else my parents might sell me when we made our way back to China. In China, there were solutions for what to do with little girls who ate up food and threw tantrums. You can't eat straight A's. When one of my parents or the emigrant villagers said, "Feeding girls is like feeding cowbirds," I would thrash on the floor and scream so hard I couldn't talk, I couldn't stop. "What's the matter with her?" the villagers would say. "I don't know, bad, I guess. You know how girls are. There's no profit in raising girls. Better to raise geese than girls." I would hit her if she were mine, but then there's no use wasting all that discipline on a girl. When you raise girls, you're raising children for strangers. "Stop that crying," my mother would yell. "I'm going to hit you if you don't stop. Bad girl, stop." I'm going to remember never to hit or scold my children for crying. I thought because then they will only cry harder. "I'm not a bad girl," I would scream. "I'm not a bad girl. I'm not a bad girl." I might as well have said, "I'm not a girl." When you were little, all you had to say was, "I'm not a bad girl," and you could make yourself cry, my mother says. Talk story about my childhood. I minded that the emigrant villagers shook their heads at my sister and me. "One girl and another girl," they said, and they made our parents ashamed to take us out together. A good part about my brothers being born was that the people stopped saying, "all girls." But I learned new grievances. Did you roll an egg on my face like that when I was born? Did you have a full month party for me? Did you turn on all the lights? Did you send my picture to grandmother? Why not? Because I'm a girl? Is that why not? Why didn't you teach me English? You like having me beaten up at school, don't you? "She's very mean, isn't she?" the emigrant villagers would say. "Come, children, hurry, hurry. Who wants to go out with great uncle?" On Saturday mornings, my great uncle, the ex-river pilot, did the shopping. "Get your coats, whoever's coming." I'm coming, wait for me." But when he heard the girls' voices, he turned on us and he roared, "No girls! and left my sisters and me hanging our coats back up, not looking at one another. The boys came back with candy and new toys, and when they walked through Chinatown, the people must have said, "A boy, and another boy, and another boy." At my great-uncle's funeral, I secretly tested, feeling good that he was dead. The 6-foot bearish masculinity of him. I went away to college, Berkeley, in the 60s, and I studied and I marched to change the world, but I did not turn into a boy. I would have liked to bring myself back as a boy for my parents to welcome, with chickens and pigs. That was for my brother, who returned alive from Vietnam. If I went to Vietnam, I would not come back. Females desert families. It was said there is an outward tendency in females, which meant that I was getting straight A's for the good of my future husband's family, not my own. I did not plan ever to have a husband. I would show my mother and father and the nosy immigrant villagers that girls have no outward tendency. I stopped getting straight A's. And all the time, I was having to turn myself American feminine, or no dates. There's a Chinese word for the female I, which is slave. Break the women with their own tongues. I refused to cook. When I had to wash dishes, I would crack one or two. "Bad girl," my mother yelled, and sometimes that made me gloat rather than cry. Isn't a bad girl almost a boy? What do you want to be when you grow up, little girl? A lumberjack in Oregon. Even now, unless I'm happy, I burn the food when I cook. I do not feed people. I let the dishes, the dirty dishes, rot. I eat at other people's tables, but I won't invite them to mine, where the dishes are rotting. If I could not eat, perhaps I could make myself a warrior, like the swordswoman who drives me. I must rise and plow the fields as soon as the baby comes out. Her reference to the swordswoman is the myth of the woman warrior, Mulan. Disney is just making a movie. They're going to release it soon, of Mulan. And it captures, or at least tries to, I wouldn't trust Disney very well on that, but it captures the myth of this woman warrior who one day saw a bird circling over her head, and the bird led her up this mountain. And they circled around the mountain up and up until finally they came upon the dwelling of two older people who took her under their wing and taught her how to be a great warrior. And at one point she was in the forest and she was very, very hungry, and a rabbit hopped up to her. She had learned to stay absolutely still for days at a time. And the rabbit looked at her and then jumped into a fire she had made and cooked itself so that she would have something to eat. And eventually, when she was ready, she dressed like a man and went back to her village to protect them against the barbarians at the head of an army. Once I get outside the house, what bird might call me? On what horse could I ride away? Marriage and childbirth strengthen the swordswoman, who is not a maid like Joan of Arc. Do the woman's work and then do more work, which will become ours too. No husband of mine will say, "I could have been a drummer, but I had to think of the wife and kids, you know how it is." Nobody supports me at the expense of his own adventure. But then I get bitter. No one supports me. I'm not loved enough to be supported. That I am not a burden has to compensate for the sad envy when I look at women loved enough to be supported. Even now, China wraps double binds around my feet. That's, of course, a reference to footbinding. And if you want some literature that you will not forget, look up footbinding and read about how it was done. It's an image that you won't forget. When urban renewal tore down my parents' laundry and paved over our slum for a parking lot, I only made up gun and knife fantasies, but I didn't do anything useful. From the fairy tales, I've learned exactly who the enemy are. I easily recognize them, business-suited in their modern American executive guise, each boss 2 feet taller than I am, impossible to meet eye to eye. I once worked at an art supply house that sold paints to artists. "Order more of that nigger yellow, will you?" the boss told me. "Bright, isn't it, that nigger yellow?" I don't like that word, I had to say in my bad small person's voice that makes no impact. The boss never even deigned to answer me. I also worked at a land developers association. The building industry was planning a banquet for contractors, real estate dealers, and real estate editors. Did you know that the restaurant you chose for the banquet is being picketed by CORE and NAACP? I squeaked. "Course I know," the boss laughed. "That's why I chose it." "I refuse to type these invitations," I whispered, voice unreliable. He leaned back in his leather chair, his bossy stomach opulent. He picked up his calendar, slowly circled a date. "You'll be paid up to here," he said. "We'll mail you a check." If I took the sword which my hate must surely have forged out of the air and gutted him, I would have put color and wrinkles into his shirt. It's not just the stupid racist that I have to do something about, but the tyrants who, for whatever reason, can deny my family food and work. My job is my own land. To avenge my family, I'd have to storm across China to take back our farm from the communists. I'd have to rage across the United States, take back the laundry in New York and the one in California. Nobody in history has conquered and united both North America and Asia. A descendant of 80 pole fighters, I ought to be able to set out confidently and march straight down our street. Get going right now. There's work to do and ground to cover. Surely the 80 pole fighters, though unseen, would follow me and lead me and protect me, as is the wont of our ancestors. Or it may be that they're resting happily in China, their spirits dispersed among the real Chinese, and not nudging me at all with their poles. I mustn't feel bad that I haven't done as well as the swordswoman did. After all, no bird called me, no wise old people tortured me, tutored me. I have no magic beads, no water-gourd sight, no rabbit that will jump into the fire when I'm hungry, and I dislike armies. I've looked for the bird. I've seen clouds make pointed angel wings that stream past the sunset, but they shred into clouds. Once at a beach, after a long hike, I saw a seagull, tiny as an insect. But when I jumped up to tell what miracle I saw, before I could get the words out of my mouth, I understood that the bird was insect size because it was far away. My brain had momentarily lost its depth perception. I was that eager to find an unusual bird. The news from China has been confusing. It also had something to do with the birds. I was 9 years old when the letters made my parents, who are rocks, cry. My father screamed in his sleep. My mother wept and crumpled up the letters. She set fire to them page by page in the ashtray. But new letters came almost every day. The only letters they opened without fear were the ones with red borders, the holiday letters that mustn't carry bad news. The other letters said that my uncles were made to kneel on broken glass during their trials and had confessed to being landowners. They were executed. And the aunt, whose thumbs were twisted off, drowned herself. Other aunts, mothers-in-law, cousins, disappeared. Some suddenly began writing us again from communes or from Hong Kong. They kept asking for money. The ones in communes got 4 ounces of fat and 1 cup of oil a week, they said. And they had to work from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. They had to learn to do dances, waving red kerchiefs. They had to sing nonsense syllables. The communists gave axes to the old ladies and said, "Go kill yourself. You're useless." If we overseas Chinese would just send money to the Communist Bank, our relatives said, they might get a percentage of it for themselves. The aunts in Hong Kong said to send money quickly. Their children were begging on the sidewalks, and mean people would put dirt into their bowls. When I dream that I am wire without flesh, there's a letter on blue airmail paper that floats above the night ocean between here and China. It must arrive safely, or else my grandmother and I will lose each other. My parents felt bad whether or not they sent money. Sometimes they got angry at their brothers and sisters for asking. And they would not simply ask, but they would have a talk story too. The revolutionaries had taken the 4th aunt and uncle's store, house, and lands. They attacked the house and killed the grandfather and the oldest daughter. The grandmother escaped with the loose cash and did not return to help. 4th aunt picked up her sons, 1 in each arm, and hid in the pig house where they slept that night in cotton clothes. The next day, she found her husband, who had also miraculously escaped, and the 2 of them collected twigs and yams to sell while their children begged. Each morning, they tied faggots on each other's back. Nobody bought from them. They ate the yams and some of their children's rice, and finally, 4th aunt saw what was wrong. "We have to shout. Fuel for sale, yams for sale," she said. "We can't just walk unobtrusively up and down the street." "You're right," said my uncle. But he was shy, and he walked in back of her. "Shout," my aunt ordered. But he could not. "They think we're carrying these sticks home for our own fire," she said. "Shout." They walked about miserably, silently, until sundown, neither of them able to advertise themselves. 4th aunt, an orphan since age 10, mean as my mother, threw her bundle down at his feet and scolded 4th uncle. Starving to death? His wife and children starving to death? And he's too damn shy to raise his voice? And she left him standing by himself and afraid to return empty-handed to her. He sat under a tree to think, and then he spotted a pair of nesting doves. Dumping his bag of yams, he climbed up and caught the birds. That was when the communists trapped him in the tree. They criticized him for selfishly taking food for his own family. And they killed him, leaving his body in the tree as an example. They took the birds to a commune kitchen to be shared. It's confusing that my family was not the poor to be championed. They were executed like the barons in the stories when they were not barons. It's confusing that the birds tricked us. What fighting and killing I've seen have not been glorious, but slum grubby. I fought the most during junior high school and always cried. Fights are confusing as to who's won. The corpses I've seen had been rolled and dumped, sad little dirty bodies covered with a police khaki blanket. My mother locked her children in the house so we couldn't look at a dead slum people. But at news of a body, I would find a way to get out. I had to learn about dying if I wanted to become a swordswoman. Once there was an Asian man stabbed next door, words on cloth pinned to his corpse. When the police came around asking questions, my father said, "No read Japanese words, me Chinese." I've also looked for old people who could be my gurus. A medium with red hair told me that a girl who died in a far country followed me wherever I went. This spirit can help me if I can acknowledge her, she said. Between the headline and the heart line in my right palm, she said, I have a mystic cross. I could become a medium myself. But I don't want to be a medium. I don't want to be a crank taking offerings in a wicker plate from the frightened audience who one after another ask the spirit how to raise rent money, how to cure their coughs and skin diseases, how to find a job. And martial arts are for unsure little boys kicking away under fluorescent lights. I live now where there are Chinese and Japanese, but no immigrants from my own village looking at me as if I had failed them. When she married, she and her husband moved to Hawaii, all the way across the Pacific, where there were lots of Chinese and Japanese, but not her fellow villagers in Chinatowns in the United States. Living among one's own immigrant villagers can give a good Chinese, far from China, glory and a place. That old busboy is really a swordswoman, a swordsman, we whisper when he goes by. He's a swordsman who's killed 50. He has a tong axe in his closet. But I am useless. One more girl who couldn't be sold. When I visit my family now, I wrap my American successes around me like a private shawl. I am worthy of eating the food. From afar, I can believe that my family loves me fundamentally. They only say, when fishing for treasures in a flood, be careful not to pull in girls, because that's what one says about daughters. But I watched those words come out of my own mother's and father's mouths. I looked at their ink drawing of poor people snagging their neighbor's flottage with long flood hooks and pushing the girl babies on down the river. And I had to get out of hating range. I read in an anthropology book the Chinese say, girls are necessary too. But I've never heard the Chinese I know make that concession. Perhaps it was like a saying in another village. I refuse to shy my way anymore through our Chinatown, which tasks me with the old sayings and stories. The swordswoman and I are not so dissimilar. May my people understand the resemblance soon, so that I can return to them. What we have in common are the words at our backs. The ideographs for revenge are report a crime and report to 5 families. The reporting is the vengeance, not the beheading, not the gutting, but the words. And I have so many words, chink words and gook words too, that they do not fit on my skin. Well, a woman, a young girl reared in such a culture. And this book describes the process, is in a long journey to find her own voice. When she was in high school and getting ready perhaps to go to college, her mom and dad, they owned a laundry, and the whole family worked in the laundry. And her mom and dad evidently took an ad out in a Chinese paper, and men started coming by the laundry, and the girls would watch as the mother and father would show the men pictures of their girls from their albums. And in one instance, a man was there looking at the pictures, and of course the girls thought they're going to marry us off to these men. And Maxine was asked to bring this man a bowl of soup, and she made sure that when she got to the sink, why, she broke a dish, and then when she brought the soup over, she dropped it on his lap. She behaved as obnoxiously as she could. And then there was a particular man that began coming around, and he was really pretty ugly and very heavy, but it was rumored that he was also very rich because he owned a store and had access to all kinds of goods, and he would bring them gifts. And Maxine was especially offended by this man. She called him the Hulk. The Hulk, that hunching sitter, brought a third box now to rest his feet on. He used to bring 2 boxes with him, and he would sit in the laundry on the boxes, and then he started bringing a third box to put his feet on. He patted his boxes. He sat in wait, hunching on his pile of dirt. My throat hurt constantly, vocal cords snapping. One night when the laundry was so busy that the whole family was eating dinner there, crowded around the little round table, my throat burst open. I stood up, talking and burbling. I looked directly at my mother and my father, and I screamed, "I want to tell you to get that Hulk, that gorilla ape, make him go away and never bother us again. I know what you're up to. You're thinking he's rich and we're poor. And you think we're old and not pretty and that we're not bright. You think you can give us away to freaks. You better not do that, Mother. I don't want to see him in his dirty boxes here tomorrow. And if I see him here one more time, I'm going away. I'm going away anyway. I am. Do you hear me? I may be ugly and clumsy, but one thing I'm not retarded. There's nothing wrong with my brain. Do you know that what the teacher ghosts say about me? That's interesting. She explains early on in the memoir that the Chinese refer to people other than the Chinese as barbarians or ghosts. The only other people that they refer to as people are the Japanese. And that stems from the bitter experience of World War II, when the Japanese invaded China and committed unthinkable atrocities. And the relationship between Chinese and Japanese to this very day reflects that history. There's nothing wrong with my brain. Do you know what the teacher ghosts say about me? They tell me I'm smart. I can win scholarships. I can get into colleges. I've already applied. I'm smart. I can do all kinds of things. I know how to get A's, and they say I could be a scientist or a mathematician if I want. I can make a living and take care of myself. So you don't have to find me a keeper who's too dumb to know a bad bargain. I'm so smart, if they say write 10 pages, I can write 15. I can do ghost things even better than the ghost can. Not everybody thinks I'm nothing. I'm not going to be a slave or a wife, even if I am stupid and I talk funny and I get sick. I won't let you turn me into a slave or a wife. I'm getting out of here. I can't stand living here anymore. It's your fault I talk weird. The only reason I flunked kindergarten was because you couldn't teach me English and you gave me a 0 IQ. I've brought my IQ up, though. They say I'm smart now. Things follow in lines at school, and they take stories and teach us how to turn them into essays. I don't need anybody to pronounce English words for me. I can figure them out by myself. I'm going to get scholarships. I'm going to go away. And at college, I'll have the people I like for friends. I don't care if their great-great-grandfather died of TB. I don't care if they were our enemies in China 4,000 years ago. So, get that ape out of here. I'm going to college. I'm not going to Chinese school anymore. I'm going to run for office at American school, and I'm going to join clubs, and I'm going to get enough offices and clubs on my record to get into college. And I can't stand Chinese school anyway. The kids are rowdy and mean and fighting all night. And I don't want to listen anymore to your stories. They have no logic. They scramble me up. You lie with stories. You won't tell me a story and then say, this is a true story, or this is just a story. I can't tell the difference. I don't even know what your real names are. I can't tell what's real and what you make up. Ha! You can't stop me from talking. You tried to cut off my tongue, but it didn't work. So I told the 10 or 12 things on my list, all in one burst. My mother, who's a champion talker, was, of course, shouting at the same time. I cut it to make you talk more, not less, you dummy. You're still stupid. You can't listen right. I didn't say I was going to marry you off. Did I ever say that? Did I ever mention that? Those newspaper people were here for your sister, not you. Who'd want you? Who said we could sell you? We can't sell people. You can't take a joke. You can't even tell a joke from real life. You're not so smart. Can't even tell real from false. I'm never getting married. Never. Who'd want to marry you anyway? You're noisy. You talk like a duck. You're disobedient. You're messy. And I know about college. What makes you think you're the first one to think about college? I was a doctor, and I went to medical school. I don't see why you have to be a mathematician. I don't see why you can't be a doctor like me. Well, I can't stand fever and delirium or listening to people coming out of anesthesia. But I didn't say I wanted to be a mathematician either. That's what the ghosts say. I want to be a lumberjack and a newspaper reporter. Might as well tell her some of the other items on my list. I'm going to chop down trees in the daytime and write about timber at night. I don't see why you need to go to college at all to become either one of those things. Everybody else is sending girls to typing school. Learn to type. Learn to type if you want to be an American girl. Why don't you go to typing school? The cousins and village girls are going to typing school. You turned out so unusual. I fixed your tongue so that you could say charming things. You don't even say hello to the villagers. Well, they don't say hello to me. They don't have to answer children. When you get old, people will say hello to you. When I get to college, it won't matter if I'm not charming. And it doesn't matter if a person is ugly. She can still do schoolwork. I didn't say you were ugly. You say that all the time. That's what we're supposed to say. That's what the Chinese say. We like to say the opposite. It seemed to hurt her to tell me that. Another guilt from my list to tell my mother. And suddenly I got very confused and lonely because I was, at that moment, telling her my list. And in the telling, it grew. No higher listener. No listener but myself. Thank you.